I am delighted to be with you here today. Today what I'd like to cover, I have a lot of material, probably more than I can ever hope to get through, but I'll give you a little bit of my background. We'll talk about what eBusiness is, a definitional look at it. Then I have three major foundational principles that I want to talk about. Moore's Law, the network effect, which is also called Metcalfe's Law, and principles of disruptive innovation. And following those three foundational principles, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about implications. So I'm a propeller head. Back in 1975, I got my intro to computers by building a Heathkit H89 computer. My dad spent I think it was $3,500 for this kit. That was a lot of money back then. Okay, $1979. What would that be worth today? One of you guys can figure that out, right? But we soldered the thing together. Those little chips, they didn't come pre-built the way memory would today. We soldered everything in, plugged it all together, debugged the hardware, not just the software, but the hardware. And then I said, okay, we've got this thing sitting on the desk. What do I do? And I learned how to program. And for a guy who is the second of 11 children, how many of you have younger brothers and sisters? Do they listen to you? Do they obey you? Oh, well, not so much as you might hope. But the computer, it listens to you. It obeys you. It slavishly does everything you want. And so for somebody with a little Napoleon complex, why, it's a great little device. So I just had a lot of fun in 1979 getting my introduction to computers. And I've been a tech guy ever since. I got my bachelor's degree and then my PhD in computer science. I've done a ton of software over the years. All kinds of different platforms, and I really enjoy being on the information systems faculty here. I used to have, in older versions of this presentation, I'd have my little Trio 650 up here as a picture of the kind of technology I love. But I've kind of changed tastes a little bit this last year. I got a bike. So anyway, new technology. All right, that's just a little bit about me. And by the way, let me apologize if I'm a little bit off. I fell down over the break and broke my head, seriously. And so my jaw's not totally working 100%, but anyway. And I came close to, sometimes you feel your mortality more than other times. Well, over the Christmas break, I felt my mortality just a little bit. Anybody a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan? What is 42? The answer to life, the universe, and everything. Okay, now I'm 42 years old, so I can feel good about that in a geeky kind of a way. Okay, let's start. What is eBusiness? eBusiness is the use of electronic networks and information technology to exchange business information and to perform or execute transactions. So, when I go to Dell.com and I visit their support site, because I'm a geek and I have a lot of Dell stuff, and I want to update one of the device drivers. Back in the old days, back in 1979, what would I do? I'd probably have to get on the phone and I'd call up somebody and they'd email me a stack of floppy disks and I'd load them into the computer. Then it turned into CD-ROMs and then DVDs, and now I can download that stuff over the internet. Tech support being automated, that's an example of eBusiness. Okay, it's not just e-commerce. Now, you've all done e-commerce probably. You've gone to Amazon.com or some other place to buy stuff online. E-commerce is certainly e-business. But e-business is broader. You can do a lot more than just buy and sell. You can perform a lot of different kinds of transactions using electronic networks and information technology. Now, so given that brief definition, let's talk about these three principles that I think are really important to understanding why eBusiness makes a difference the way it does. Okay, let's start with Moore's Law. Gordon Moore was co-founder of Intel, a really dynamic person. In 1965, which if you've done your arithmetic, you'll know that's the year I was born. In 1965, he drew this little graph over here, and he made this observation that, you know what, it looks like every 18 to 24 months, we can double the number of transistors that fit on our integrated circuits. And so it's hard to read his scribbling here, but I think you can see number of components, something per integrated circuit, I think is what he's written down here along the bottom. And he's just drawing graphs over time of what you might expect at different using different processes that they have. Anyway, so people have turned this into a thing called Moore's Law. And if you plot Intel's processors over the years, you'll see that it actually follows that line that represents every 24 months, doubling every 24 months. It follows that line pretty closely. So here you have the 4004, 8008, the 8080, which was kind of the CPU du jour when I was learning about computers. And then up in here, finally, we get into the Pentium chips. And it is amazing. It is truly amazing the capacity that exists on these machines. The eBusiness Center just bought a 4-blade server from Dell. Each blade, I get excited, I'm sorry, it's kind of like Christmas. It was better than Christmas when I opened it up, I'm sorry. Each blade has 2 Xeon CPUs, and they're quad-core CPUs. And each of the blades has 16 gigabytes of RAM. And we got 4 blades. And I mean, these numbers just really get me excited. Sorry, I'm a geek. I told you that. Here's what Moore's Law illustrates. If you double over time, very quickly you get this rapid exponential growth. So in 9 generations, you go from this little tiny sliver on the left to this huge stack on the right. Okay, let's look at it another way. What if we double transistors? So in generation 1, we've got 4 transistors that we can fit into this space. Well, that means the transistors are pretty big and there aren't very many of them. Look what happens when we double. They get smaller, the transistors get closer together. And that continues to happen. And what are the challenges you run into when this happens? Well, one of the challenges is that every transistor, it's like a little heater. And one of the problems that companies are dealing with is how do you manage all the heat that comes off of those things? If you open up a server, you'll see that there are these big old heat sinks on top of the CPUs. Even a regular PC has heat sinks, but you look inside of a server and they have these huge old heat sinks that are trying to dissipate all that power, all that energy. But also, because they're closer together, you can communicate faster. And so what we've seen over time is that the speed of our chips has gotten a whole lot faster. Back when I was doing computers for the first time, that original computer ran at 2.5 million instructions per second, basically. 2.5 megahertz was the clock cycle. And now today, what are our clock cycles? Anybody have a 3 gigahertz clock cycle? 3 gigahertz processor? Okay, so I saw a couple of hands. Okay, million versus billion. We're 3,000 times faster. Okay, 1979 to 2008. We're not quite 30 years. But in less than 30 years, we've gotten 3,000 times faster. That's 15 doublings at every 2 months. But clock speed is not enough to tell the story all by itself. You also have to count the number of transistors on the chip and how much you can store and so forth. Okay, let me see if I can help you see it another way. Here's how much time it would take to transmit the new Encyclopedia Britannica using various network technologies. Okay, back when I was in high school, I had a friend who had a modem. It was really cool. We could go over to his house and call into the bulletin board systems and do stuff. Okay, 1,200 bits per second. That's what the modem would run at if it was a fast one back in those days. It would take 28 days to transmit the Encyclopedia Britannica over that technology. Now, after I got married, we had a 28K modem, and we thought that's pretty good. Now we're down to 28 hours to transmit that thing. How many of you have DSL or cable modem or something like that at home? All right, so you could transmit that amount of information somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 minutes or 60 seconds, somewhere in there, depending on how fast your connection really is. Okay, there is some amazingly fast fiber technology out there right now. You look at the ATM SONET stuff, and I was hunting. I wanted to find out what's the fastest network that I can find today. And I went looking at the latest things. OC 3072 is 10 times faster, more than 10 times faster than that OC 256 that would have transmitted the Encyclopedia Britannica in 0.2 of a second. Okay, I went looking and I found this article. In fact, I pulled it up on the browser here. NTT Docomo in Japan, they built a 14 terabit per second network. Okay, you can transmit 140 high-def movies in a second at that speed. Okay? The capability of technology is just mind-boggling. What you can do is amazing. Okay, there's a story that the Emperor of China fell in love with the game of chess. He's not unlike John Richards, who loves the game of chess, as I happen to know. Okay, so the Emperor of China brought the inventor of the game of chess in, and he said, you know, the typical story that an emperor would say to somebody who's done something really wonderful. Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. And the inventor said, let me think about that. You know what? I want a grain of rice. And the emperor thought, a grain of rice? Surely you must jest. Well, a grain of rice for the first square, 2 grains of rice for the second square, 4 grains of rice for the third square, and so on until we cover the chessboard. And the emperor thought for a moment and said, granted. Now, did the emperor have the capacity to grant that request? Okay, how many squares on a chessboard? 64. Okay, what is 2 to the 64th power? Okay, 2 to the 32nd power is 4 billion. So it's 4 billion times 4 billion. I mean, it's a huge number. That's what doubling does to you. Doubling very, very quickly gets you into a range that is just mind-boggling. Okay, so here's what we see. We see converging trends. You've got increasing computational power, so your CPUs are getting faster and not only faster but more capable in a lot of ways. We can store a lot more information. How many of you have at least a 500 gigabyte storage capacity at home? Anybody have a terabyte? More than a terabyte? Amazing. I went this last summer down to Costco and I pulled off the shelf one of their terabyte storage units and I said, I'm going to buy that sucker and take it home because I can. It's a terabyte. And that was just, it was anyway, a geek thing, I'm sorry. Increasing storage capability. Increasing bandwidth. Okay, Google Earth came out and I thought, wow, this is why I want fiber coming to my house. DSL or cable modem, that's not enough for me anymore. I want fiber coming to my house so that I can really live Google Earth the way it was intended to be. Bandwidth is increasing. How many of you have fiber coming to your home? Okay, you're either on Utopia or iProvo, right? Okay. Oh, I wait for the day when it comes to North Orem where I can sink my teeth in. Okay, all of this is happening at a decreasing cost per unit. Today you could go out and you could buy a pretty powerful computer for a lot less than the $3,500 my dad spent on that H89 years ago. And the other thing that's happening is increasing connectivity. How many of you can browse the internet while you're driving down the road? Yeah, there are a few of you with data connections on your cell phone or whatever. We're able to connect in more places than we could before. Okay, so what happens here? We increase the speed and capacity and we lower the cost of our technology. That's what Moore's Law explains. That's what we're doing here. People are inventing things all the time that do this. All right, that leads to us being able to process information faster. You may have heard well, I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay. When we can process information faster, that gives us the capacity to rethink our operating procedures. And we can innovate our companies and decide, hey, we're going to do things differently because we can do it better now. And when we do that, we develop new goods and services and market them to the consumers out there. As we do that, there's this thing called a network effect that increases demand for more IT that I'll talk about in a minute. And that leads to an increase. Companies say, you know what, I'm going to spend more money on research and development. And when they do that, they can then do the next generation of increasing speed and capacity and lowering costs. And we've been in this virtuous cycle for decades now. That's what's happening to our world. And Moore's Law kind of explains that. Let me take a minute and talk about the pace of change. We have been seeing hardware changing. Technology has been changing rapidly for years, and it will continue to change for, I think, as long as any of us are alive. And now we're starting to see that the same thing is happening on the business side. Businesses are beginning to innovate very quickly. There's this concept that people bandied about half a dozen years ago that said, hey, internet time is faster than regular time. Traditional cycles are shorter. Clearing a check these days. Well, now the retailer can run your check through a little scanner, and they can verify right away with the network that, hey, yeah, there are funds to process to cover this check, so it's okay to accept it. Whereas, and you actually might lose the float that you had 10, 15, 20 years ago. Traditional cycles are shortening because we're making these electronic connections. Distances between people are smaller. Last night I was emailing off to people in Switzerland, and I could just as easily email somebody in California or in Mongolia. It doesn't matter. We're very much closer. There are still barriers, but this network keeps us connected. And the web never sleeps. You've heard 24/7 as sort of the term of round the clock. But it's even more intense than that in a web environment. In a 24/7 environment, well, technically they're really the same thing, but it just feels more intense when you've got consumers all around the world. And you know what? You've got as many people awake in the middle of our night as are awake in the middle of our day. And so there's never a time when you can say, oh, you know what? Let's go down for maintenance at 3 in the morning. That'll be the time when it's least likely to... Well, if you're a regional business, that might be true. That there are these windows when you have a little bit of downtime in terms of customers coming and using your resources. But the web has made everything more intense. Okay, so principle number 1 that you need to know about is Moore's Law, this doubling idea, and what some of those implications are, what it's doing to our world. Principle number 2 is the network effect. Now, a network effect occurs when a product becomes more valuable as people use it. So, telephone network. How much good does it do me to have one telephone? Not much good. I mean, if it's got some functions, some games on there, maybe I can play it. But the value of a telephone is being able to communicate with somebody else. So my telephone becomes more valuable when my mother buys a telephone as well. And then when my brother buys a telephone, my network gets even more valuable. And it continues to grow as more people join the network. Same thing happened to the World Wide Web. Why is the web such a wonderful phenomenon? Well, it's because just about everybody's there. Just about every company is there. Just about every individual is there. It is a place where people gather and share and publish and do the things that we do on the web. Microsoft Windows is an example of a technology that exhibited a network effect. How many of you have a Macintosh? Okay, last year their percentage went up. They've been making some changes that have been making some inroads. But Windows holds the lion's share of the market. Is anybody running Linux as your primary desktop? Okay, a true geek or two here. Okay, we can talk afterwards. Okay, Windows is the king of operating systems on the desktop because, well, we'll come back to that in a minute. Sorry. English language is another one. When I go to international conferences, I speak to people from France, from Spain, from China, from Japan, from all over the world. But we communicate in English. And so it is to their advantage to learn English. And it's to my advantage as well. Okay, Metcalfe's Law. Robert Metcalfe founded 3Com. He was the inventor of the Ethernet. So on a daily basis, you're impacted by this fellow. His law states that the value of a network increases in proportion to the square of the number of users. And no, this isn't a math class. It's just the same kind of exponential growth we were talking about before. If my network has 10 people in it, then the value is proportional to 10 squared or 100. If my network doubles to 20, the value doesn't double. What's 20 squared? Maybe it is math class. 400. 100 versus 400. My network value didn't just double, it quadrupled when my size doubled. And so you get this exponential growth factor. And because there's an exponential growth factor, you get these very valuable networks that establish quickly. So the initial cost of setting up the network is usually large, but adding one more user on there, that's a small cost. If you want to buy a cell phone, how much does that cost you? I mean, some monthly fee, 40 bucks a month, 50 bucks a month, something like that. What did it cost to build the network in the first place? I mean, that was probably billions of dollars, right, to set up that infrastructure. So we have these kinds of, when you get that kind of a formula, where there's a large initial cost to build the network, small incremental cost to add a user, and then the value of the network grows as people join it, then you get a network effect. And what happens is you get this winner-take-all mentality. Back to Microsoft Windows. Here's what happened with Windows. Users said, I'm sorry, in the early days, before there were a lot of users, Microsoft said, hey, developers, we're going to take care of you. We'll do compilers, we'll do all kinds of tools that you need to write software, and we're going to take care of you. And so they got an initial core set of developers who started putting together some interesting programs. And then those programs attracted more users to the Windows platform. Users said, oh, there are a lot of programs available here. We're going to go buy Windows. And then more developers came and said, hey, you know what? Users are coming to this platform here. I'm going to develop for Windows before I worry about any other operating system. And we got this cycle that feeds on itself. There's a feedback loop going on here. And very quickly, the market converged on Windows as a standard. Now, the same thing happened on handheld operating systems. And Palm OS was the king of handheld operating systems for a long time. They still hold a dominant position. I don't know that they're ultimately going to be the winner in that space, but for many, many years they have been. And we see this kind of thing all over the place. The web is another example of that. There were other technologies available besides HTTP, but because it was so easy to use, and there was this network effect, this value that went up exponentially as people joined in, the web just sank right into this technology space that was primed for that kind of a service. You're going to continue to see this kind of a thing. Communication continues to be very rapid, very effective. And so you're going to see these feedback loops that iterate quickly. So if you're a company trying to establish something, you want to manage network effect. You want to understand, how do I build that kind of feedback loop that's going to get people to come to my platform, to my product, to my whatever it is. Users tend to have this herd mentality. A user doesn't want to be stuck out in the middle of nowhere without anybody to support them. How many of you are a little bit uncomfortable trying to support and maintain your own computer? Okay, be honest. I get calls all the time from people who, man, I'm having this computer problem. Can you help me figure it out? Well, a lot of us are that way. And in fact, I don't like supporting computers very much either. I'd like to be in a space where I could send an email out to my students' mailing list and say, hey, I'm working on the following thing. What do you think? And somebody will come up with an answer right away. That's an example of a network effect. I want to be in a space that other people are in too, so that I'm not the Lone Ranger out there on the plains. Okay, so let me skip this slide and just keep moving on in the interest of time. Principle number 3, disruptive technology. Okay, disruptive technology is one that displaces an existing entrenched technology. Now, the reason it does this is not because it's a better technology. The reason it displaces the existing one is because it provides better value. So what happens is we make innovations that alter the basis for competition, and we just shift the marketplace a little bit. Here's a good example of how to visualize this. Over time, there's a range of performance that the market demands. Not everybody demands a 1 terabyte storage unit and 3 gigahertz quad core or whatever. Some people demand something a little bit less than that. So there's this range of what people are expecting in any particular market segment. And over time, people get more sophisticated. Okay, back in the early days, maybe I didn't care if I had air conditioning in my DeSoto. But today, by golly, if I'm going to drive a Honda around, it better have air conditioning. Okay, so over time, the market demands more. A technology gets invented. And what happens is the inventors or the producers of it say, hey, you know what? We've got some customers out here who are telling us, if you do the following 3 things, or the following 30 things, you'll improve the technology. And so they build a better version the next time around, and a better version the next time around. And over time, eventually, the technology becomes so powerful that it even exceeds what the market is really demanding, even at the high end. Can you think of any technologies like that?
The iPhone.
The iPhone? Okay. So Perhaps it's exceeded some of what the market really demands. What about Microsoft Word? Has anybody used all of the features of Word? I know I haven't. But anyway, there are a lot of them. And there's somebody who uses every feature. That's why it's in there. It's because Microsoft is listening to people and saying, oh, you want, spell checking? Sure, I'll implement spell checking. You want to do it on the fly? Okay, we'll do it on the fly. And there are all kinds of features in there. Okay, along comes some disruptive innovation. And it follows its own technology trajectory. So look at this red line here. When it's introduced, where is the green line? It's kind of towards the high end of the market. It's a good product, a really good product. And we look at where the red line starts. It's below the low end. It's a technology that when people in the market look at it, they say, man, what a joke that technology is. I'm never going to buy that. Okay, so what about, let's think of a technology. How about solar-powered television? That sounds like kind of a cool technology. Okay, if you were to find a solar-powered television today, would you be willing to buy it for use here in Provo, Utah? You're shaking your head no. Tell me why not.
Because first of all, I'd have to watch TV outside all day long.
Okay, you'd have to find a way to set up the TV outside.
Days like, well, all throughout the winter.
Yeah, what happens in the middle of the night or all throughout the winter? What if the battery maybe it doesn't have a battery, or maybe the battery doesn't have a high enough capacity to last very long? Oh, guess what? It's a 5-inch black and white TV. You okay with that? No, we're all spoiled. We're saying, give me my 1080p high definition television. I want 42 inches. No, that's for the bedroom. I want 60 inches. Okay, so we have marched down the blue a little bit here. We demand a little bit more from our televisions. But what if you were in Mongolia and it turns out you didn't have a good power network, and it turns out you had a fair amount of sunlight capacity, and the only television stations that were really of interest would show up just fine on a 5-inch black and white television? Do you think that it might take hold there? Okay, so what happens with a disruptive innovation is typically it's aimed at a market that is not being served. What it has to compete against is not the 60-inch plasma high-def television. What it has to compete against is no use at all. I mean, what's your alternative? Either not watch television or watch this solar 5-inch black and white TV. That's the kind of a situation where a disruptive innovation gets a foothold, and then over time it gets better and better. And eventually it ends up entering the low end of what the market, the mainstream market, actually demands in terms of performance. Now, where's the green technology when the red one enters the market demand area? It's above the high end of the market. So what happens is the red line says, oh, I will satisfy a certain low-end customer, and because I'm so far below the green line, I can sell this for so much less. That green line is going to be really expensive by this point compared to the red line. Has anybody followed the one laptop per child initiative? The $100 laptop? Okay, they're struggling a little bit right now. The cost is more than $100. It's more like $175. And Intel is competing pretty hard with them. But they're facing exactly this kind of thing. They're trying to enter this low end of the market where there just isn't a lot of supply. What they're competing against is not being able to have a computer at all. But if you look at a one laptop per child machine, I forget what they actually call the thing. Anyway, if you compare that little laptop with an ordinary laptop that you'd be okay using, you're in the green above the market demand, and they're in the very low end of the market right now. Over time, maybe it could develop into something really interesting. Their CTO just left, and she started her own company where she's trying to commercialize some of the innovative display technology that's really low cost and really high quality that she's been helping develop as part of the OLPC initiative. So we see this on a regular basis. Technologies come and they go. And you come up with a better value, and it takes time. You have to have a little bit of patience with that technology and stick with it. But eventually, you'll displace the existing technology if you do it right. There have been a lot of technologies that have disrupted things. Steam engines disrupted a lot of horse hauling and things like that. Railroads came through and displaced a lot of steam engines and so forth. Today, courier service is displacing the postal service. Email is displacing courier services. And the stories go on and on and on. Cheaper foreign labor, there's one. What's it displacing right now? Does that worry you at all? Personally, I'm not too worried about it, but that's a topic for another day. The lesson with disruptive technology is that dominant companies tend to be really slow to transition. They can't see it coming. And even when they're listening to their customers, they can't see it coming. Here's what's happening. A disruptive product is cheaper and simpler, and what that translates to in a manager's mind is, oh, there's less profit there. Why am I going to pursue that product which is going to give me less profit? I've got this really profitable product, and I need to make sure that it continues to live and flourish. And how do you do that? You add features to it and you make it better. You don't replace it with something that's worse in terms of overall performance, even though the other thing might be a better value. You don't go to your Cadillac customers and say, hey, let's sell you a bicycle. Well, a moped. Okay, we'll sell you a moped and add a little motor to that thing. So because you got a motor now in your Cadillac, and anyway, they just don't do that. They keep on building better and better Cadillacs. All right. What typically happens with a disruptive innovation is that it'll go into an emerging market, and then once it's got a foothold in that emerging market, then they'll be able to step over across from that emerging market into the mainstream market and start to take over. Your most profitable customers are constantly... Yes, you have a question.
How would this work with your example of the 5-inch block?
Okay, so let's say it actually was a real need. I don't know if this is a real need, but let's say they started developing in Mongolia. And what kinds of things would they innovate? They would innovate the power system. And maybe they could develop a power delivery mechanism that could turn into something that I could mount on my car. And rather than powering a 5-inch black and white TV, I'm powering some other kind of a device. So when I go on a camp out with my scouts, we can watch movies on the solar-powered thing or whatever at night. Actually, we wouldn't want to watch movies. We'd want to go out and hike. But anyway, you could say maybe there's technology in this one subsystem that could then go over to serve the mainstream market in some other way. It probably wouldn't be a black and white TV that you could introduce into the Provo marketplace and really succeed with. But like the OLPC example, maybe that display technology that you develop so that you can have this thing work outdoors in bright sunlight, maybe that display technology is worth commercializing in another way too. And so it can either go piece by piece, or sometimes it's the whole product that just jumps over because it gets good enough. Your most profitable customers want improvements. They don't want a lower performing product. They want improvements, and they tell you that. And that's what the managers are hearing. Your most profitable customers can't use that disruptive technology initially. And so because resources are coming from your customers and your investors, and because large companies don't grow by these small markets, and because you can't analyze a non-existent market, for all of these reasons, traditional managers have a hard time seeing disruptive innovations. And it takes a special kind of training and a special kind of eye to observe and to notice what could potentially disrupt me here. Okay, I'm in the industry of the university and education. What could disrupt my business? We've been hearing for years that we're going to get disrupted. Online education. Maybe. It's kind of poor right now. And if it really is a disruptive innovation, well, it's following the trajectory here. It's in this space that's well below the low end of what the market demands. And I've been working on online education, by the way, trying to see if there are some things that we could do to maybe improve how we as regular professors deliver education as well. Anyway, so you need to start looking for how can I try to spot these disruptive innovations before they take me over. Okay, having said that, let me move on to the final phase then of my presentation. Thomas Friedman, he's a reporter for the New York Times. He wrote a book called The World is Flat, and he talked about 3 phases of globalization. And this is really a nice tutorial on the history of technology over the years. In phase 1.0, from Columbus to the 1800s, he said the world was characterized by industrial power. For the next 2 centuries, you had multinationals that kind of ruled. And then he said, look, in this new millennium, what we have is we have individuals who are empowered, and empowered in a really interesting way. Okay, think about the artisan in Afghanistan. Maybe she's a mother, a widow, who has a skill of weaving rugs or doing other kinds of crafts. I would love to have one of those rugs in my home. In fact, I had an opportunity last semester to go to India, and when I was there, I brought home a cashmere wool rug for my wife. It was her Christmas present. It was a surprise, and I was really happy about that. But anyway, it's really fun to have as a rug. And we put it at the foot of our bed, and every morning and every evening I see that there, and I remember, oh yeah, it's time to say prayers. And it's a really neat little thing to have. Okay, how many people around our country would love to have something like that? How can we connect that artisan who's in a totally different world with this market that would consume that product? How do we empower that individual? Overstock.com, Patrick Byrne, he's an interesting character. He developed this play called World Stock, and he did exactly that. He said, okay, artisans, we will connect you through our website, through our Overstock website, and we'll let consumers buy through here, and we'll broker the relationship here, but we'll let people buy at a fairly small markup to us, and all of a sudden this woman now can deliver that product very efficiently to the American marketplace. It makes a lot of sense, and there are a lot of technologies here. Friedman believes that this extreme interconnectedness that I was talking about at the beginning of this talk, he believes that that's at the heart of globalization. The extreme interconnectedness has essentially flattened the world. I'm as close to China as I am to Orem right now, because I can go right here to a website in China or a website in Orem with equal ease. I can email them with equal ease. It's leveling the playing field. It's allowing anybody anywhere to participate in the world economy. That's his main thesis. And he talks about 10 flatteners. I won't take the time to go through each of these, but it's an interesting book if you're interested in the history of technology and maybe where this world is going. If you're really curious about e-business and what it's doing to the world, this book has a lot of anecdotes that will kind of help you see the picture there. So what are you going to do? How are you going to adjust to work and to survive in this kind of a world where e-business is kind of the driving force behind all business? You need to know how to add value. Everybody needs to understand the competitive drivers and the strategic aspects of your business. It's not good enough to say, you know what, I'm just going to be, okay, let's say you're a geek and you want to be a programmer. All right? I'm just going to be a programmer and I'm going to sit in my corner and I'm going to program. That's not good enough. You need to understand the competitive drivers and strategic aspects of your business. You need to know what's important and be able to innovate. Okay, it's not good enough just to say, you know what, I want to be the receptionist, I want to sit and answer phones and connect people. That's not good enough. You need to understand what your company is all about and how you're adding value. You can't just be a technology guru and say, you know what, I'm going to learn all these acronyms and figure out all these technologies. That in and of itself isn't good enough to make a difference in the world. You've got to figure out how you're going to use IT to solve real business problems. You've got to figure out what the problems are and how to address them. You've got to develop your creative powers. You've got to be able to figure out, how do I do a better job than my neighbor? Maybe not your next door neighbor, because maybe you're his home teacher, but your neighbor in the next town over. There are people all around who are trying to compete for your marketplace, and you've got to be creative enough to get that competitive edge. You're going to have to retool over and over and over again. You can't just learn a set of technology and then say, okay, I've learned technology, now on to the phase where I work for a living. In fact, even at the university, we have opportunities for faculty like me to go on professional development leaves, which is what I'm doing right now, actually, from January through August. I'm working as the Chief Technology Officer for a local startup called Entice Labs. I'm still doing my BYU research and working with the eBusiness Center, but I need to retool. I've got to get better at IT, and I've got to see what challenges real companies are facing and figure out how to innovate and how to deal with them. And so I think every one of us needs to take that approach of, hey, let's get involved. Let's not just let our careers happen to us. Let's manage our careers. Let's be innovators. Let's be creative. If you want to maintain a quality of life that's high, you're going to have to actively manage your career. And don't just let things happen to you. Don't let somebody put you in a box that says, oh, you're going to deal with transactions and data all the time. You want to go up this information value chain. You want to become so valuable to your company that not only are you a repository for knowledge, but you're helping to make decisions. That's where you can really make a difference. If you're a decision maker, then you are in some control. That's important for you to do. Figure out how to get out of the low end of the information value chain and move up that chain. And you don't do it just by sitting there and doing whatever people tell you and accepting what comes your way. You've got to get out there and be creative and innovate. You've got to be a lifelong learner. There's a scripture in Isaiah that talks about in the last days the earth will be covered with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the oceans. And I kind of feel like we're inundated today in information. There's knowledge everywhere. You could spend day and night reading web pages. You could spend day and night just reading one website like Wikipedia. And you would never get through it all. You'd never learn all that there is to learn. Change is so rapid and it's happening everywhere that you're going to have to focus. You're going to have to learn, how do I sort out the wheat from the chaff here? How do I find out what the good nuggets are and throw away the bad nuggets? So I would encourage you to do whatever you need to do to find your lifelong learning path. Don't ever let go of your curiosity. And be a one who causes change, not one who gets run over by it. Now, as director of the eBusiness Center, I want to say the eBusiness Center is a great place for you to come build your resume. We have some interesting programs. The Web Analytics Competition, we have eBusiness Day conferences. We have a number of activities like that where you can get involved and you can work with some of our faculty and with other students who are in this space, and you can make a difference. We have light opportunities and heavy opportunities. And next Wednesday after this class, okay, I can't add. 16 plus 7 doesn't equal 25. It's the 23rd. Wednesday, January 23rd, just right after this class. I wrote down 3 o'clock, but 2:50. Just stick around next week, and you can talk with some of the area leaders over the various eBusiness Center committees and see, is there something that you'd be interested in doing? Maybe it's just being an usher for one of our activities, or maybe you want to get involved on a committee and do something a little bit more intense. There are some great resume building opportunities. And we've interacted with some wonderful people, some really high-profile people sometimes, and just real experts in e-business. So anyway, that's the material I have presented for you today. It's been a lot of fun. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes and be happy to answer them. Thank you.